Hello again. One of the major themes in cognitive psychology is the behavioral school of thought of psychology. So we have a rat here, and from the little joke, the little sign he's holding up, you can see he is probably being trained, right? He's going to press a lever and then get some food. So he's being trained and conditioned to get his food. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Okay, so behavioral psychology is the study of external and observable behaviors. Okay, observable. This is not Freud. Behavioral psychologists don't care what's really going on in your mind. Don't really care about what happened in your past. They just care about what they can see in the here and now. So behavior is objective and observable, whereas what goes on in one's mind can never really be known or measured. Okay, so that's pretty obvious. You would probably agree with that. You can't measure sadness. You can't measure memories. And they believe that all of our behaviors are the response to stimuli. So the response to things around us. We are always being trained to do things, and that's why we do things, basically. You may have heard of Pavlov's dog before. If you haven't, you will learn about it now. So he was a Russian physiologist, and he discovered classical conditioning in dogs. Okay, so what happened here? I want you to watch these videos, and they will explain classical conditioning better to you. Okay, so I'm going to explain that classical conditioning to you now, but I do want you to watch those videos. Okay, so we're going to look at the unconditioned stimulus, so the thing, okay? And this is the food, so there's your nice piece of meat there. And what is our unconditioned response? So what happens with no training? The dog salivates, the dog drools, okay, when it sees food. What's the neutral stimulus? The neutral stimulus is something that doesn't have to do with anything. You're just bringing a random thing into this situation. Pavlov brought a bell into this situation. Okay, so what's the response of the bell? The response would just be the dog would be like, huh? Okay, I hear a bell. Okay, so that's kind of no response. During conditioning, what happens? We pair the unconditioned stimulus, which is the food, with the neutral stimulus. They're paired together, and what happens? The unconditioned response is salivating. Okay, because it's going to salivate when it sees the food, but you're pairing it with this neutral stimulus. Okay, so now we are ringing a bell every time you give your dog food. Okay, so what happens after conditioning? You're probably going to guess, and you're probably right. Now, every time Pavlov rang the bell, the dog would salivate. Okay, so now it's conditioned to think that there's food coming every time a bell rings. If you have a pet, you can probably easily think of an example of this. I have a cat, and it eats wet food at a specific time every day. It's conditioned. I don't know how it knows the time. Animals are really weird that way, but it knows around like 6 o'clock. It starts like bugging for food. And if we just tap, if the cat's outside or something and you tap on the bowl, it knows that that sound has been paired with food. And so then it comes running. Right? So your animals are really conditioned. What's something we were conditioned with at school would be the bell. Right? The bell to leave school. A bell is just a bell. It's not an actual thing. But the bell is associated with leaving. Okay, so they've paired the bell with the leaving, and that makes us excited. So every time you hear that bell sound and it's 3:15, we're like, yeah, excited, and you run out. Okay, so there's just a little cartoon. There's a dog running. I think mom's using the can opener. That's exactly what I was talking about. The dog hears the sound of the can opener. It thinks that it's going to get some food. Okay, so another psychologist, John Watson, was a little after Pavlov. He proposed that the process of classical conditioning was able to explain all aspects of human psychology. Okay, so he's pretty hardcore. According to Watson, everything from speech to emotional responses were simply patterns of stimulus and response. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of that. Let's say let's say I have a baby, my baby says dog, like, yes, dog, you're right, come here, puppy. The dog comes over or whatever, the dog licks the baby is then getting a response, right, getting a positive response, a positive reaction. It therefore knows what the word dog is now. Okay, Watson denied completely the existence of mind or consciousness. He believed all differences in behavior were just due to different experiences of learning. And this is one of his most famous quotes: "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, in my own special world to bring them up in. I will guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to be any type of specialist I might select. A doctor, a lawyer, an athlete, you could say anything." I think he says a thief, a beggar and a thief. I think that's the continuation of the quote. So you can think of someone who's an amazing athlete, right? Maybe who was trained, like if you've ever heard of Tiger Woods, the golfer, he was trained from the time he was basically a baby to become a golfer. And he became an amazing golfer. So that really fits in with John Watson's theory. Here are a couple examples of some classical conditioning. So kids who often get strep throat, let's say, after much swabbing of their throat, begin to gag as soon as they see the doctor with the swab, okay? Because they gag from the swabbing, they see the swab, and they start gagging that, even though it's not in their mouth, okay? Because they're conditioned, they're associating that swab with a gagging feeling. Hearing a teacher, your roommate, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, parent say to you, "We need to talk." Upon hearing this phrase, your stomach flutters. Why? It's just a phrase, right? It's a neutral stimulus. It's just a phrase, but you have associated so many times that phrase with "we need to talk" with something bad. Okay, so the point is we learn to associate a stimulus with a response. Eventually our body does this automatically in the presence of the stimulus, and our response therefore becomes involuntary. So this is the gagging or the stomach fluttering and the dog salivating. Classical conditioning can face extinction where the learning is undone. Okay, so let's say let's say we keep ringing the bell, but there's no meat. The dog is eventually going to stop caring about the bell. Okay, so it can get undone. Another psychologist looked at a different kind of conditioning. This is not classical, but this is operant conditioning. He's all about reinforcements and rewards. Okay, so basically nothing in our life is done by free will. Everything is because we get a reward for it. So he often worked with pigeons and rats and applied what he learned with these animals to humans. Teachers can deliberately use operant conditioning with students. Okay, so some operant conditioning, a really easy example is you do a test, you get a good mark, therefore it increases your desire to study in the future. Okay, and just watch those videos. The first one you're really going to like, it's funny, and watch the second one so you understand operant conditioning. And let's just look at these 3 parts of operant conditioning: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishment. That's all you need to know for operant conditioning. With positive and negative reinforcement, the behavior increases. Okay, so this is our, let's say, studying increases. Punishment is behavior decreases. So let's say a kid hits his sister and then he gets his video game system taken away. The punishment is the video game system getting taken away, and that behavior decreases. So he stops hitting the sister. At least that's what you hope. Okay, positive reinforcement. You behave in a certain way that results in a reward. Okay, you are more likely to repeat that behavior. Negative reinforcement, you behave in a certain way that results in the removal of something unpleasant. Okay, therefore your behavior is going to increase. So this one is a little more difficult to understand. So for example, let's say if you do a paper early, let's say you hand something in 2 days early, and your unpleasant stress goes away. Okay, let's say you're not stressed. You are going to be likely to repeat that behavior because something negative got taken away. Okay, I'll give you another example. Let's say you live in Mississauga and you have to commute to Toronto every day to work in the morning. Leaving at, let's say, 5:45 a.m., there's no traffic. That unpleasant traffic behavior is going to get taken away. Okay, therefore your behavior of leaving at 5:45 is going to increase. Okay, so there's positive and negative reinforcement. Punishment, I think, is there are different types of punishment, but we're only going to talk, there's positive and negative, but we're only going to talk about one. So a consequence that follows a behavior, so you do the behavior less often in the future. So there are the two, but adding something, so paying a fine, staying after school, or involve removing something, losing recess, leaving your friends. Adding something or removing something, you perceive it as bad and you exhibit the behavior less. Okay, you're going to hit your sister less. You're going to talk less in class because you don't want to get punished. And that's the end. That was a long one. Bye-bye.